25th episode. Can you believe that? Before we introduce today's guest, Guy, you had some pretty exciting news launch over the last week or so. As you teased in the last episode, we're indeed going to see you back in a racing car in 2021.
Yeah, that's right, Paul. It's kind of came a little bit out of the blue. So I'm going to be doing the Sebring 12 hours, the Watkins Glen 6 hours, and the Petit Le Mans in Atlanta at the end of the year. So wasn't really kind of planning on it, but my good friend Jim McGuire, who I know from the US, and he races for United Autosports LMP3, wants to go back and do some racing in the US, and asked me if I do it with him. So such a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, should be good.
You say it happened quickly, but these things, as we've learned in this series, as I've learned, you already knew it, but these things don't happen quickly. It's all about relationships, and we'll find that with today's guest as well. Now, speaking very technically, I could have introduced our latest guest as a British touring car champion, because for a brief slither of time he was, but a technical infringement would hand the title to a fellow racer, his rivalry with whom would pretty much define the story of his early career. This is a racing driver who knows how to win some of the biggest races that you and I know in the world, and who isn't afraid to speak his mind on and off the track. Fans love him best, though, for his antics and achievements in saloon car racing, particularly touring car racing, and particularly with that long-running association with BMW is still ongoing to this day. I am, of course, talking about Soperman himself, BMW touring car legend, Steve Soper. Welcome to Spinning Wheels, Steve.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I grew up watching you race, and you're one of those people who, when I mentioned to my mates that you were coming on the podcast, they all had something to say. They all had a question to ask, and most of them had something to do with John Cullen, but we'll come to that. Most of us of a certain age, I'm just past that age, I'm pleased to say, started our driving careers off in an Austin Metro. You started your racing career off. Did you guys got his hand up? You started your driving career off.
My first car was a Mini Metro. So
well, Steve Soper's first racing car, first proper racing car was a Metro. Am I right, Steve?
Well, there was quite a bit of one-make championship and racing before that, but what I kept doing was picking one-make championships, new ones that weren't that hadn't sort of started. And if I picked a mini championship, a new one, or a Metro or a Fiesta, to enter those at the beginning was easier to win the championship. If they'd been running for 5 years, it was very difficult to come in and then find all the tricks in the first couple of races was very, very difficult. So the Metro Championship was probably the last one I did, which I won. And that certainly opened the doors at Austin Rover to a factory drive the following year.
You as you say, you started with Austin Rover. I mentioned the Ghost Touring Car Championship, which never was, but there was a technical infringement. You were due to win the championship one year. It didn't quite come off, did it?
No, unfortunately, at the time, it didn't worry me. It didn't worry me at all. But years later, you know, when you're looking at the record books, and I think, oh shit, I won that championship for 6 months, and then it was taken away through no fault of my own. And to be fair to Tom Walkinshaw, who I was never the greatest fan of, and our relationship wasn't that great. What he did on the engine was purely to make it, you know, to maintain the engine easier. And all he'd done was make a hydraulic tappet, which basically you used to have to take apart and shim it all up, and it took for ages. He just put a little grub screw on the top of it, so that instead of shimming it up with shims, he could just adjust that with a little nut and bolt. But obviously, as the letter of the law is, it wasn't legal. And eventually, he basically, you know, driven a horse and cart through every rule up until then. And they were out to get him, and they got him on that. And along the way, I was the poor guy that suffered.
So let's step back a bit before that. We like to hear how our guests got into racing. And there isn't a great deal. Normally, you Google someone with your profile's name, and there's a big, long list of things that you did before you became a professional racing driver. But I know you did race pretty hard in club motorsport, because you've referenced that a few times in this. But what exactly got you into this?
My pop used to sort of do rallying and sprints and the odd 8 clubs Silverstone race back then, and was a certainly an enthusiast. And as a kid, I was dragged along as a spectator watching him, or we'd go to Crystal Palace or Silverstone. And I suppose it just took off. But he was an odd dad. I mean, you know, as much as I loved him, he would never give me any money to go motor racing. And he used to say to me, listen, you can't go out, you can't have a girlfriend, and you can't go racing. You've got to pick one or the other. You can't afford to do all of them. And of course, you know, as a teenager, you just ignored that. But in the early days at 15, I used to use his competition license, and I used to do grass track events with the Harrow Car Club, and they used to turn a blind eye. They knew it was me, and then they knew I was using this, but you know, they just didn't say anything. So I do. Sorry. He was there. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
He'd go and sign me on with me,
right.
And you know, give his license and say, "Oh, just use that." So we did slaloms and autocrosses and grass track sort of slaloms and stuff like that. And I think I started doing that at 14, 15. So I was obviously, you know, gonna go motorsport one way or the other. But he would give me every hour of his that he had to help me with preparing the cars, but he'd never give me any flipping money. Which I, you know, all these years later, I've got a daughter saying, I want to go motor racing. She's not young anymore. She's sort of 27, 28. But, you know, I just say, well, you know, who's paying for that? And that ends the conversation.
That all comes in a full circle. So
yeah,
you started off sort of doing that then. How did you, because the biggest leap is always from that initial phase of, you know, grassroots motorsport, which most of us have had to go at in one shape or form or another. And then a few of you managed to actually make that big leap. And it is a big leap between that and then the Thor series where you get noticed. At what point does that become your life and you decided that this is what I'm doing? Or did you just keep going and having some...
I just kept going. I never had a focus, I'm going to be a professional racing driver. That was just a dream. Right. But as much as I could go motor racing, that's what I was trying to do, you know. And I in the early days, I had minis and a Hillman special saloon. And I'd do a couple of races, run out of money. The car would sit there for 3 months. I'd find some money, enter another couple of races, have an accident, break an engine, run out of money. And that's how it basically started. And I started back in 71, so a long time ago. But very soon I realized, even back then, there was people spending lots of money on engines and cars, and I just didn't have that money. And they were winning because of what they'd spent on the engine. Same old story as today, basically. Money was, you know, getting results. So I then started entering one make championships, and I decided, as we said earlier, that if I entered a one make championship early enough, I could win it. And most of those championships I picked, the prize was a brand new road car of that model.
Okay.
So I won the mini championship and won a brand new 1275 GT. I did the Fiesta championship and won a new Fiesta, whatever it was. And then I did the Metro championship and won a brand new Metro. And that helped fund the motor racing as it was going on. And then eventually that opened a door. The first Metro championship, Austin Rover wanted to make an example of the person who won it. So they put me into a category that it made you look good. If someone won, this is what you can achieve. And basically that opened a door with a contract, a very small contract. And then eventually it opened the door for the Rover contract. Yep. But even the Rover contract with TWR was all to do with, it was being in the right place at the right time. And I don't think I'm the best racing driver in the world. And I don't think I'm, you know, academically that smart. You know, I sort of left school at 15, but I'm streetwise. And I could see where there was sponsorships coming and where Austin Rover were doing what they were doing. And I was in the right place, kept my ears open and started to sort of network the sponsors. and eventually I got that opportunity to have Hepalite Glacier sponsorship on the car. And that relationship started with a one-make championship, the Metro. And it started with £500. The next year I got 5,000. And when we went to Austin Rover and TWR with a Rover, I got 135,000 back in '83. And that was the only sponsor I've ever actually gone after and succeeded in getting. And at the end, that money, that 135, I could have taken it to Austin Rover or BMW. I could have taken it anywhere. So that was my lucky break in keeping my ears to the ground, keeping my eyes open, and sort of slightly manipulating this. I mean, it was going in a direction anyway, and all I had to do was slightly steer it in my direction, if that makes sense.
You're very well known in your career for your long-running association and your loyalty to BMW, but it was your loyalty to, perhaps misplaced at the time, but your loyalty to TWR and to Austin Rover that almost cost you, and did for many years, lose you the BMW chance anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had quite a, well, not quite a good, I had a very good relationship with John Davenport at Austin Rover. My contracts were with him, but they lent me to TWR, and I did not gel with Tom. Whatever reasons, I don't know, but basically one day John Davenport said, after, I think it was after the '83 or '84 season, put down on paper how we can improve things just between you and me. And like a naive, silly racing driver, I wrote 3 pages of what was wrong. And of course, 2 weeks later, it was on Tom's desk, and I get a phone call from Tom, and he basically says, you need to drive and not think you can run the team, and keep your mouth shut. Don't talk to any of the press, but you're on the bench, you're grounded. And if you keep your mouth shut and keep your head low, he says, I might bring you back at the end of the season. And that's exactly what happened. So I learned the hard way of politics and what goes on, what to say to the right people. But then when that contract was coming to an end at the end of 1985, I was already trying to manipulate things and get out of there and go somewhere else. In '83, when I started in BTC, BMW offered me a contract back then for a great contract, driving in Europe with either Eggenberg or Schnitzer, alongside Hans Stuck or Manfred Winkelhock. Wow. And I told Austin Rover about this, and they said, oh, don't do that. Stay with your friends. We'll match the money and we'll give you a 2-year contract. And if I wasn't that young then, but if you're naive, it's easier to stay where you are than leave. And I stayed, and then I got completely mugged by Tom. And, for the next 2 years, I wish I had left. But it was Europe. I was slightly intimidated of learning racetracks, being with a foreign team and driving against or with, teammates which stuck. It could have either worked or it could have failed miserably. Yeah. So when the contract came to the end in '85, I hooked up again with BMW and tried to make that work. And that was going in the right direction. And then over Christmas, it all went quiet and nothing happened. And after Christmas, no one was answering the phones, and I was getting panicky. And then suddenly Ford came on the phone and said, look, there's a deal here. We're going to run an old Ford Sierra Merca for the first '86 championship. And then the Cosworth comes for '87 and '88. Would you be a part of it? Eggenberger's running the team, etc., etc. And I was along that road about to sign, and then suddenly the overall director of Ford was Stuart Turner at the time. And he'd seen interviews with me. In one particular interview was in Motor, and they absolutely slagged me and said I was a spoilt brat and ranting and raving in Austin Rover. Obviously, he didn't know all the background. And Stuart told Ford Germany and Eggenberg, he said, I don't think we need this guy. You got the wrong choice. He's a pain in the butt. And I luckily had enough gall to ring him up and say, can I have a chat with you? And I went and down there and explained all the circumstances, and eventually that door opened for me. And I joined Ford. I didn't join BMW, and it took another 3 years before I joined BMW in '89.
I was watching one of the videos, Steve, from Brands Hatch GP with you and Andy Rouse.
We wouldn't have had that, would we, if he'd gone to BMW?
Yeah, you in the Texaco car and Andy Rouse in the Caliber one, and it looked, those cars looked, I mean, they look wild to drive, and some big old power slides going on. It looked like a lot of fun.
It was. The interesting thing about that story is that I persuaded Eggenberger to come over to the UK, and I persuaded him to do 3 or 4 BTC races. I didn't actually tell him that there was a £5,000 bonus for anyone in the UK winning a Ford race, and that was my motive. And of course, I came over, I won the first one at Thruxton, and then we went to Brands, and then after that, Donington, and I think in there was the Birmingham GP as well, which we never raced, it got cancelled. So every time Andy beat me, not only was it very, very upsetting that he beat me, but I also lost £5,000, which I'd already banked before we even came over. I was convinced I was going to win all 4 races, and that never happened.
But at Brands, he had the more advanced car, didn't he? He had the updated turbo, and you were on the straights, he was overtaking you, and then on the in-car, you see you slip out 3 times, I think, in the last 3 laps. It was starting to rain, and you slither back in front of him.
Well, there's also a story behind that. When Eggenberger was touting for the factory deal with the Sierras, Andy was also touting for it, and they picked over Andy. Andy won the BTC umpteen times up until then, but they still picked Eggenberger over Andy. And Andy had he was sore about that. And I accept that. I think anyone would have been sore. So every time he came across me and Eggenberger, if he had to throw his engine away afterwards, he threw it away. I mean, he wound the flipping boost right up to prove a point that he should have had that deal. And unfortunately, I was the guy that he beat. At the Brands Hatch one, if you can be pathetic enough to watch it in slow motion, on the last lap when I got him, I stayed on the inside, so he actually had to drive from the near side of me, overtake me, and I figured he wouldn't get totally in front by the next, I think it's Hawthorne's, it's the next corner, the quick right-hander. And I judged all of that, and then on the last lap I was on the inside. And if we're going down the straight, as Andy comes up to pass me on the left, there's a slow car on the right, and it's bouncing along the flipping grass.
Ironically, it was a Rover, wasn't it? I think it was.
I don't know what it was. It might have been a Rover.
I think it was.
And basically, I had a panic on. I'm not a very brave person, and I could see this thing getting closer and closer to my side of the track, and I came off the throttle. I just came off the throttle, and I had to turn left and slot in behind me. And I'm convinced. And the guy never came back on the track. He stayed 6 inches from the track, but I just panicked and came off the throttle to give myself room in case he did. Otherwise, it would have looked like a plane crash. So
it was almost wasn't it? So that must have been a hell of a closing speed when you were heading down towards.
Yeah. And in my small world, I felt I should have won that race, and I should have driven home with £5,000 in the bank, but I didn't.
But you drove home with a legend, though, because everyone talks about that race.
Yeah, I know.
My best.
When it rained, I had the legs on him, but when it was dry, he could then put the power that he had down. He could use better. And Andy and I have had several meetings and interviews, and he says, it wasn't the engine. We altered the rear suspension. You had anti-squat or anti-dive on it, and he had so much horsepower, it was untrue.
You could see. Yeah. So far, Steve, what I've gained from this conversation is you're not very brave, you're not the best driver, and you're not very academic, but you've had a pretty good career considering all of these things. And it's interesting because you know, when we do this podcast and we speak to all the different drivers, it's really interesting because you sort of get, there's like usually a theme going as to people's, you know, people never come on and say, I'm the best, I was great, I was awesome. It's actually very much the opposite. It's like, well, you know, I don't think I'm the best. I've had to work harder. You know, it's all about trying to find opportunities. And, you know, when you speak to young drivers, you know, they often say, well, what do I need to be a professional driver? And I think you kind of summed it up in the respect that it's not, nothing's a given. The talent is almost, you're expected to have the talent, the ability to drive the car, but it's actually your work ethic and how hard you want it and how hard, you know, I don't think people understand that if they look at your career, the fact that you've been with BMW for so long, people will probably think, oh, he was with BMW, it was easy for him, he just had a license contract. But just to stay in that position, you know, the work you have to, you know, behind the scenes with the team, with the management, to position yourself to maintain that, you know, despite being, you know, one of the very best touring car drivers, if not the best touring car driver of all time, it's not a given that you're going to be automatically in that position. And you've got to have that work ethic, haven't you?
I think so. And I think you've got to understand what's going on behind the scenes of whoever you want to go and drive for, whether that's a sponsor or a manufacturer or someone like ProDrive, or you've got to understand what's going on behind the scenes, the people who make the decisions, the people you need to network, people you need to get on with, and the people, it's not about, you know, oh, I'm the fastest around the old Nürburgring. It doesn't actually work if you're doing something else wrong. Yeah. And I did certainly I learned a lot of hard lessons at Austin Rover, and they really, you know, they kicked me in the teeth when I was down. And I did think, having found a factory contract, that it was all going to be over, and I was determined not to let that happen. My wife used to say I had spent more time on the phone making sure I had a drive for the following year than I did on any driver training, fitness, or anything like that. It was all about making sure I had a drive for the following year, and whether that was a year contract, a 2-year or 3-year, that's what I used to concentrate on. And I am happy with my career. Yes, I never got to Formula One. Would I have wanted to? Could I have done it? Who knows? But I had a factory manufacturer's contract for 21 years. Yeah. So I never had to look for sponsorship. I had good contracts with being paid good money to race around the world. And certainly Austin Rover was bad news. Ford was great news. BMW was cherry on the cake.
Yeah. Crucially, I watched an interview with you a while ago where you talked about the Ford deal, and you talked about the difference between Ford and BMW. And you were talking about a time, and you'll tell the story much better than me, so I'll let you take over. You were talking to a top exec at Ford, and he said, "Who are you then?"
Yeah. We were in Germany, Ford Cologne. I was up on the top floor in their sort of canteen restaurant with my boss at the time. And we were sat at this table, and there's a guy sat next to me, and I didn't know him, he didn't know me. And he obviously heard me talking in. My German's never been any good, and it certainly wasn't any good then. So he turned to me, and he was one of the sort of directors. I don't know what department he was in. He said, "So who are you? What do you do?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh, we race cars then?" He didn't have a clue, you know. And I enjoyed the Ford Motor Company, or Ford Motorsport, was a good company. You know, I was spoilt. I asked for things. Sometimes I got them, sometimes I didn't. But it was a nice company to work for. Now, the reverse, if you turned up at BMW, when you turned up at the four-cylinder building, the receptionist who logged you in, that gave you your pass to get up to the top floor, knew who you were. She'd actually, you know, congratulate you on your last DTM race, or say that was unlucky. Yeah. It was bred into them that it was motorsport. Their whole world, certainly back then. Today, maybe it's fallen off a bit, but back then in the 80s and 90s, it was all motorsport. It was a fabulous company to work for.
That's such a striking and human observation, actually, for someone who was, you know, mid works factory contract to I know you did it afterwards, but to have made that observation, it must have, those sort of things must have set you apart, because most people would just take that on the, not really care, really.
Yeah.
Who cares what the top exec thinks? But as you thinking further ahead, you will think about things like that and overthink them and play them around in your mind and think, does that matter? And it does matter, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it meant, and don't get me wrong, I mean, Ford was great. The second year or the third year, I was negotiating my contract, and I wanted quite a bit more money. I wanted about another 25-30%. Ludwig was the big star and the big earner, and I tried to negotiate and get about another 25% on my salary, and I didn't get it. You know, my boss said, look, I just don't have it to give you. You know, I'm giving you 5 or 10% more, but the last, you know, I haven't got it, mate. So I signed, and, you know, I was still happy. I just wanted a bit more, like we all do. Anyway, about 2 months later, this was in November, the contract came through at the end of January, and, you know, it's like 15, 20 pages, and everybody like me, you just go to the last page to make sure that the negotiation is the money that you thought it was. And I went straight to the back page, and it was more than I'd, you know, agreed with. It was the amount that I'd asked for. And I thought, sugar, what do I do? Do I keep quiet, or do I ring him up and say, look, I think you've made a mistake? And I thought, well, if he knows about it, I better ring him. If I don't say anything and he knows about it, anyway, I rang him up and I said, Luther, I said, the figure we discussed is wrong. I said, you know, I said, I'm happy, but it's not what we agreed. And he said to me, and this is how good Ford was, bear in mind BMW was even better. He said, I told you at the time I didn't have the money. He said, I also told you if I had the money, I'd give you it. He said, at the time I didn't have it. Now I've got it. You've got it.
Wow.
Fantastic.
And that's the difference of, you know, Austin Rover to Ford, and then Ford to BMW. And BMW is just another step, just a totally another step. There's another story with BMW. My boss at the time was Karl-Heinz Cadfeld, lovely guy, but you had to understand him. His nickname was Charlie the Boxer. And, you know, he did lose it a few times, but I got on with him after a couple of years. I got on with him very well. And there was a Japanese championship that I did, and I agreed to do it for 1 year, not the second year. I said, I'll do it for 1 year. Anyway, cut a long story short, we nearly won it the first year in 94. And then come 95, I actually wanted to do it again, but I didn't want BMW to know that. And they came on the phone and they said, you know, will you do it? And I said, no, the deal was, anyway, another story, cut it short, they paid dearly for me to do it a second year. And the second year we won the championship. But part of that agreement was that if I won the championship, I could pick my championship, whatever they were doing in the world, whether it was Italy, Australia, UK, Germany, Belgium, I could pick my program. Fantastic. So, and I picked Germany for 96. And suddenly I hear little rumors that BMW UK want me to do BTC, and I just kept my head down and didn't rise, didn't make any contact with anyone. And then eventually, about February, the phone rings at about 8 o'clock in the evening, and it's Karl-Heinz on the phone. Oh shit, you know, where's this going to go? And he comes on the phone. He says, listen, he said, all your mates in England want you to do BTC. He said, BMW, GB want you to do it. Why don't you want to do it? And I said, look, I don't want to do it. We had an agreement. Forget the agreement. It's all bullshit, the agreement. You know, they want you to do it. You should race in your own country and blah, blah. Anyway, his favourite little bit of him was, he used to say, are you motivated? You know, come up to you. You'd be sitting on the front row of the grid, and he'd come up to you at 3 minutes to go, and he'd say, are you motivated? And I used to sort of say, no, I'm not really in the mood today, just to wind him up. And anyway, this discussion, this phone call went on and on and on. And I thought, shit, I'm losing this. I'm going to end up in bloody England. And I don't want to do England for many reasons, financial reasons. And if you've raced in the UK, for 20 years in club racing, you know, driving to Snetterton does not do anything for me. You know, once I'm at Snetterton, it's not so bad, but just, you know, that road and that path. So I was definitely losing the battle. And I said to him, I said, look, Carl, I said, you're my boss. I said, if you tell me to race in England or you tell me to race in Russia, you're my boss, I'll do it. But I said, however, if you ask me what I'm motivated to do, I said, it's not to race in the UK, it's to race in Germany. That's what I'm motivated. But I said, tell me to go to England, I'll go. And he on the phone, he said, you shit English guy, and he hung up. And I knew I'd won what I wanted. That was it. I was left in Germany. He had to ring England up and say, no, he's doing Germany. But it was just, he didn't say anything. He just said, you shit English guy, and put the phone down on me. And that's how he was.
I love that.
Because he was mad, or because think he was mad, or
well, I got him at his own game. You know,
right,
it was all this motivation bit. You know, so it just that's who he was. I mean, he was great to me. I used to be paid in Deutschmarks, and then the Deutschmark dropped to the pound. It was horrific, and I lost about, you know, a load of money. So I phoned him up and said, can I? When we negotiated the contract and Deutschmark was that to the pound, I said, can you pay me in pounds? Because I said, I'm about 20% worse. He said, how am I going to do that? I said, well, you told me you're a bit special. You could make all sorts of things work. and he did it. He changed my contract. Yeah. So I was better. That's the sort of person he was a great boss. However, his pet things were timing. And I arrived for a meeting in Germany one day, and I was 3 minutes late. I got to his receptionist 3 minutes late, 12:03. By the time she got through to his secretary, it was 12:05, and I'm looking at my watch thinking, shit. Secretary came down and said, no, you're late. Book again.
No way.
Make it. And I had to fly the way back to the UK.
Blimey.
And when I got to see him, he said, I'm not a racing driver, Steve. He said, I start at 6:45 in the morning. And he said, sometimes I don't leave the office until 9 o'clock. He said, if everyone's 5 minutes late, I won't leave the office until 10 o'clock. So he said, next time, get an earlier flight or get a hotel. I'll pay for your hotel, but you need to be on time. I tell you, I was never, ever late. I used to be an hour early. Yeah. I do it wherever I had to be. I do a recce the night before, so I knew where I was going in Germany, so I wasn't late.
That's great management.
Lesson, though. What a great lesson for these young kids coming up now. These lessons, these kind of life lessons. I mean, they're so important, aren't they? Because the kids kind of saunter around now, and it's all, you know, social media, and it's all like, you know, it's understanding these kind of lessons, and about, you know, you can't be late for meetings, and you've got to be on time, and you've got to do your
and that's exactly it. I mean, we had another meeting. We were doing something at the Frankfurt Motor Show, and we had to be there at 8 in the morning for a meeting, a debrief. And the night I'd already had the, you know, go home, book another. So I was already in tune. So the night before, I recce'd where I'd need to go, and I decided to leave my car at the hotel and just get a cab so I could get to the right gate where this meeting was. And I was there at 8:15, and we had a debrief with my sort of manager who was under him, and Mark Schurer was involved. And there was, I think, 10 drivers that were meant to be at this meeting. And he turned up, my boss, and he sat with all the drivers, you know, in the audience, as you say. I was the first there, 8:15. And then most of them got in there by about 8. And then there was 3 that didn't get in for 8. They got in at 8:45, 9, and one didn't even make it. You know, one never turned up. God knows where he was. And at the end of the debrief, Mark Schurer stood up and he said, so any questions? And we all sat there, you know, like, you know, dumbies, not saying anything. And he stood up. He said, yes, I've got a question. He said, I don't understand why I leave Munich at 4 a.m. to be here at 8 o'clock in the morning. And he said, certain drivers can't be here on time. And he said, let me tell you, he says, all of those drivers, I've got their names. He said, I know who they are. They're written down. I won't forget. And he says, you will regret it. And when he said, you will regret it, he smashed the table with his fist and screamed at the same time, you will regret it. Smash the table. Wow. And that's who he was. But on the other side of it, he was brilliant. Yeah. He was such a wonderful boss, but you knew what to do and what not to do.
You knew where you stood.
And that, as you just said, that's the lesson. How do you teach an 18, 19-year-old? You know, I learned the hard way, and luckily I was, carried on to be employed. But, and he once, sorry?
It's the lesson I want to teach my kids. I'll be showing them.
Yeah. And someone actually said to me once at BMW, they said, in DTM, I used to have a lot of accidents. There was a lot of damage occurred in my team. And no one ever said anything. But someone from BMW, my immediate manager at the time, said, he said, we don't mind accidents with speed. He said, what we really object to is a lot of accidents with no speed. He said, no speed and accidents is not acceptable. He said, accidents with speed is acceptable. But all that, they're simple things, but people just don't understand.
So Steve, when you joined BMW, did you ever envisage that you would be there, or there for so long and become, such a long relationship with them?
As a kid, that they were who I wanted to drive for. If I had a dream, sitting in the Silverstone grandstand in 1970, one or something, watching these Ford Capris and the Batmobile BMWs coming through Woodcote, the Schnitzer cars, the Eggenberger, the Louis cars, I thought, if I could only get there. So it was a dream come true. And they lived up to every sort of expectation that I ever had of them. They were just great company to drive for. And if you cocked up, you just own up. If you make a mistake, if it's not your fault, fight hook or crook for it. But if it's your mistake and I think that's why I was respected. Yeah. If it wasn't my accident, I'd fight, all day long. Yeah. But a lot of the time it was my own mistake. I said, well, I made a mistake. Yeah. I said, Michael Schumacher's paid hundreds of millions and he makes mistakes. So what do you think you get with me?
Yeah. BMW was really and I've heard you say this, it was very much the Ferrari of the saloon car.
Yeah, it was back then. Yeah, it certainly was. And I used to say to many people and to, press, media, friends, fans, I'd say, I don't think I'm that good. And I can be leading a race and making mistakes and cursing myself because made a mistake, focus, concentrate, shit, made another mistake. But then I'd look in my mirror and I'd be pulling away from everyone. So I'm not that good, but the lot behind me are even worse. That's how I viewed it. And I also viewed that, if you went to a very populated race meeting at Silverstone, a support race, there's thousands of people in the grandstand. I bet you there's guys sitting in that grandstand that could do a better job than me that just never had the opportunity. And that's how I viewed my motorsport.
But do you not think that mentality, because I have the same mentality, and I know a lot of drivers do, is that it makes you push and try and be better, because you think, I'm not that good, so I'm going to work harder. I'm going to try harder, because it's slightly fear, because you want to do well for your bosses and your manufacturer, but you want to do it well. You want to do well for yourself, and you've got to prove it to yourself and to everybody else every time you get in the car. And I think that never goes away. Even now, you do with the historic racing you've got. When you get in the car, you still have to. Do you still not find? You still want to go out there, and you're Steve Soper, so you've got to go out there. You're expected to, even now, to go out there and blow everyone away because you're Steve Soper.
Yes and no, but I want to win because I want to win. Yeah. And a lot of my mistakes is that I think I've won before I turned up. And that sounds overconfident and arrogant, and I'm not. But I've put so much effort in. I've done I've done testing, I've done the lap time.
Yeah.
And then when it all goes wrong at the race meeting, as we know, motor racing always does go wrong. It never comes out. I drive home. I'm so pissed off that it's untrue. And another aspect of it, when I was professionally driving, employed by a manufacturer, when I won, I could never go, way, you know, Schumacher jumping up and down on the rostrum, you know. I never got that. My coming across the line and winning was, thank God for that. You know, I'm meant to win. I'm employed to win. Thank God I have. It was so much of an anticlimax. Are you like that?
Yeah, well, it is. It's like when people say about Le Mans, you know, how was it going over the line? And of course, it was amazing, but it took like a week or a week and a half for it to sink in, because it almost didn't. It almost doesn't. Yeah, it's almost like a more relief than anything else. It's like, I've done my job, because we're here to do a job. We're building up to it for months and months and months, and all this work. Once you do your job, it's like you've done your job. So you're right. The actual, it almost doesn't feel real. And I mean, probably when you're driving home and it's all, you know, the adrenaline's gone, and you're driving home and you feel a bit relaxed, you can probably think, oh God, that was really good. You know, I won, I did it. It was brilliant. And you can enjoy it and to the next event.
Sorry guys, this is where, if you're listening at home, this is where I come in, because I've never driven RS 500 Super Touring Brands Hatch against Andy Rouse. I've never won Le Mans. I've never won all these things. I would enjoy it, but it must. You've got to explain this to us, guys, because we're at home. We're thinking, I've never driven these top cars. I've never driven touring cars. You know, these people are my heroes, and you're bashing doors with them, literally, in Steve's case. And you talk about crossing the line, and it's an anticlimax.
It's what you're employed to do. So you're employed to do and be successful and win the race. So when you achieve that, you think, thank God. So it is an anticlimax. There's no punch in the air. Well, not with me. There was never a punch. And everyone used to say, my wife would always say, you look so miserable on the podium. Why can't you smile? And I'm just thinking, you know, good. That I've done that, you know.
It's just for someone like me and people listening at home, that will be quite an incredible and human thing to have told us. Nathan Shaw on Facebook said, not about the result, but what was it like? How did it feel to drive the Sierra RS 500 during what you could surely see was an epic battle with all those crowds in the stands at Brands, and you can see them on the videos for miles. How did it feel? So, okay, crossing the line, second or first, is the job done or not? But how does it feel when you're in that moment and you know that this is pretty epic?
Well, unfortunately, in that moment, you don't know how. You know, when you're doing that, I never realized it would be on YouTube 30 years, whatever it is later. And secondly, it's whatever you've got. I think we had 500 horsepower. Eggenberger would never build a sprint engine. I was still using the long distance engines that we ran in the World Touring Car and ETC. Yeah. So whatever the car felt like, and I'm sure that this is the same with Guy, 520 horsepower, I wanted 600. Whatever grip I had from the tires, I wanted more grip. And that's whatever you've given, you know, for the first 2 laps, it feels good. Come the third lap, even with a full-blown BMW Le Mans car with 700 horsepower, 5 laps in, you want 800 horsepower. So it's, again, or maybe it's me, it's an anticlimax. I've got to try and win that race. The cars were very nice to drive. And interestingly, Ford brought one of the original Eggenberger car over to Goodwood last year, I think it was, or maybe, no, it's 2019. Yeah. And I hadn't seen or driven that particular car since 1988. And I thought, this is gonna be horrible around here. And it was original. Nothing had been done to it. It was, you know, they put a set of tires on it, and that was it. And I got in it thinking it was going to drive like an old MOT failure, and it actually drove really well. It really sort of surprised me how great it felt, how much power it had, how much grip it had, how it I thought, shit, this is really good. And bear in mind, I've raced the Rover in Historics a few years ago with Chris Ward and JD Classics and everything. That car felt horrible. That car felt 30 years old, whereas the Sierra Cosworth didn't. So the Cosworth was great. But if I was just doing some laps for my own pleasure or taking some people rides on a media day, the car would feel great and you'd appreciate it. Once you're in heavy racing mode and you're competing it's just not good enough. Yeah. However much grip you got, you need more grip. However much horsepower you got, you need more horsepower. So all of those things, unfortunately, for the sort of the question you've got back then, it was forgotten.
That's a fantastic.
I remember coming in at Brands and we'd rubbed a couple of times and it had blue paint down the side of it. And I remember getting some teacup before Eggenberger arrived, because the pits are obviously down in the centre of the circuit, and the sort of assembly and part Ferme back then paddock was in the outside of the paddock. And I got some teacup and I was rubbing all these paint marks off the side of the car so he wouldn't scream at me and see that it was all scratched. And that's who he was.
That's a fantastic. Nathan cannot not be happy with that answer. That's a
What was the favourite time, your favourite time of your career? Which kind of the eras, different series or
This is another question, actually, isn't it? Jude on Instagram asked, what was your favourite race era and favourite race car? So we'll tie them in together.
Perfect.
Okay, probably 99, the prototype in the American Le Mans series.
Really?
That car is amazing. The sound of that car.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And there's another story there. Unfortunately, McLaren, BMW got involved with McLaren hoping to go Formula One, to persuade BMW and McLaren that they could supply an engine for the McLaren. And after a couple of years of being involved with the McLaren and the sports car, and McLaren doing a lot of development work on the BTC and BMW Super Tourers for the world, BMW realised that McLaren weren't going to drop Mercedes and they weren't going to be able to put a BMW engine in the back of a McLaren. So they suddenly jumped to Williams. And part of the Williams deal was they build a car to win Le Mans. So the first one, the 98 one, was the first BMW prototype that Williams had built. And it was not a nice car. It was competitive-ish, but at Le Mans, we had wheel bearing problems and we retired both cars. Then they decided to build another one for 99. And Tom Christensen and I did all the testing of that car. And between us, we did about 6,000 kilometers of testing. And then as we were building up to Le Mans, my boss was sidelined, pushed out of his position by Gerhard Berger. Berger had arrived to oversee the Formula One bit. My boss had employed him, and then Gerhard had sort of basically got his elbows out and pushed my boss out of the way. And suddenly I didn't fit in with Gerhard's dream of Le Mans and going forward. So I was down to drive the 99 car at Le Mans with Tom and JJ, and then suddenly Gerhard comes on the phone and says, look, I don't want you in it. I want you to drive the old car with Thomas Bashir and Bill Oberlin. And obviously that went down like a lead balloon with me. And as much as I thought that, I couldn't overturn it. And as much as I said, look, talk to Snitzer, talk to Williams, they'll tell you how quick I am, talk to Tom. I wasn't a Formula One driver, I was out. So I drove the shit box and they won Le Mans. But the deal I had with Gerhard was that after Le Mans, if they took the car and did the American Le Mans series, that I'd be back in it with JJ. And although I had to remind him of that deal because he forgot after Le Mans, he did to sort of bring me back into that car. So to cut a long story short, that was the best car I'd ever driven. It still is the best car I've ever driven.
Yeah.
And I think we did 5 races in the American Le Mans series with Jay. I think we won 3 of them out of the 5.
Was that in 2000, Steve? What year was
99.
that? 99.
I did a couple in 2000, but I was even further out of favour by then, and I was getting old, and I was coming up to 50 then in 2000. Right. So I'm coming up to 70 now. So, and also from 99 until 2000, something changed in me. It just, in 99, I was totally on top of that car. Come 2000, I was behind that car. So when things were going on, I can only describe it to not you two, but to the public. You're skiing and you're going down a black run and you're actually out of your depth, but somehow you get to the bottom. Yeah. And it's not, maybe it's a bit of experience and it's a bit of luck. And from 99, I became that person. I could still do a time, but shit, did I have to dig deep. And I used to think in a quick corner, Sebring, you were talking about earlier, there's one quick left-hander with a bump in it. Every time I hit this bump, I thought, if this thing gets away, I'm never going to catch it. This is my thought process in 2000. Yeah. So come 2000, I'd had it. You know, I could not do the same job as I could do 6 months earlier in that car. Yeah. But in 99, I could. And, you know, I'd been teammates with JJ in 97 with the McLaren, and we'd done an awful lot with the McLaren. And again, now in 99 with that, it's a brilliant car. It was run by Snitzer. Yeah. It was a fantastic championship at the time. Yeah. And that was my best time. And also I really loved racing in the US. Yeah.
Yeah. I think every, you know, we all, Europeans, any Europeans, you know, spoke with Andy Prio, Ollie Gavin, obviously myself raced in the US. I think we all love it. Derek Bell, you know, obviously when he was racing, you know, the Group C stuff in Europe, he always loved going and doing the stuff, just because of the nature of the circuits, and of course the way.
I think it's more of a health hazard.
Yeah, it's not as safe, but
no,
but competitive racing, but with a nice balance of
as a friendliness. Nice, it's sort of almost clubby but professional. Exactly. If that makes sense. Yeah. Very, very competitive. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. Yeah. So that was my best time. I mean, if you take that car, I hated Le Mans. I did Le Mans, if we get onto that. The first time I did Le Mans was 83, and there was no chicanes. Yeah. And I did it in a Mazda, rotary Mazda. And I made a promise to myself in the middle of the night. And I told you at the beginning, I am a coward. I do not want to, I'm the only driver that when he gets into a racing car, I've assessed everything that can go wrong. Everything that could happen in an accident or car failure, I've already assessed. You know, how strong it is, you know, what's going to happen if I go in frontwards, backwards. Yeah. Can I get out if it catches? I'm one of those people. I wear 3 layers, underwear, 3 layers, balaclava, everything. On the hottest day, I'm fully kitted up. So come Le Mans 83, I made a promise in the middle of the night, if I survived that race, I would never, ever go back. That's how much it frightened me. And the problem is, I can't not drive 100%. It scares the shit out of me. But if I'm gonna turn up, I'm gonna give it everything I can. But I did say I would never go back, and I stayed away until 96, until BMW got involved with McLaren, and they knew my thoughts on that race and that circuit, and they said, look, we're going to do it until we win. Do you want to be part of it, or do you want to just stick with touring cars somewhere else? And you know, the biggest race I could ever win in my career would be Le Mans. Yeah. And I thought, well, you know, the team, the car, everything I know is going to be spot on. Yeah. If something's going to go wrong, it's just going to be bad luck. And I could win this race. Yeah. So I better be part of the 96, 97, 98, 99 program. And when they did win, unfortunately, I was in the shit box, not the proper car.
I think you're right. When you're when you've got an opportunity with a good team and a good car, it's very hard not to do it. I mean, to go. It's like.
Did you enjoy it?
I loved it because I was in a position. I mean, obviously the when I was with Bentley and then the following year with Audi with Johnny Herbert, I knew we had a position to win. So when you're in a position to win,
yeah,
and I was only late 20s, so at that point, that's your career. You've got to not that you've got to do it, but I did enjoy it. But when I look at like the Indy 500, and it's such a I mean, you see like Dario and Dixon and these guys. I mean, they've had an amazing career, but when you see these guys that go and do like bump day in some like crappy team in some crappy car,
yeah, I know,
and you're just thinking, what just to be a part of the show, what are you actually doing? Because the risk is the same whether you're running 33rd or first. The risk is the same, but the reward is very different, and it's probably similar to Le Mans in some respects. Is if you're going to do it and you can win it or you can be competitive, like you said, it's about assessing it. If you're with a team that and a car that is well prepared, then you're giving yourself the best opportunity to perform and to be safe. So I fully respect that.
I mean, I love the car, driving it around the circuit. I love the circuit. What I didn't like were the slow cars at night.
Yeah.
And back then there was no headlight distinctions. They didn't know, in the braking area. I'm sure it's the same with the Bentley. In the braking area, we'd have 100-mile-an-hour different speed. They'd be on the brakes at 150. 200, and they'd be slowing down from 160 down to about 100, and you still go full flat past them at 220. And if they move, and every lap of the race, I'd swear at someone and make myself thin in the seat because I thought we were going to hit. And to me, that's not motor racing.
Yeah.
It's not, have you seen me? Have you seen, please have you, whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
Missed. And I just don't get that. I really, my fear was, I think that, the big McNish accident in the Audi coming after the Dunlop coming onto the straight when the Ferrari, whether, whose ever fault it was, to me, fast car, the Ferrari never saw Alan, and a huge accident. Imagine if that's, that's under the, at 220 mile an hour. That's the bit I hated. And I used to I did Le Mans how many times? 5-6 times. And I'd get everything in order before I went. So my whole house, bills, money, all of that, because I didn't know if I was coming back.
It's funny because it's things like you cut the grass, you become like real OCD when you before you go, because it's not something. For me, it's not a conscious thing, but it's a subconscious thing where you want to make everything is just tidy, organized, offices.
Careful, guy, because you still got a wife who knows you're still racing.
Well, I know that, but I do know what you're saying. But
my wife loved the race. She just absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
She didn't understand why I didn't like it. But I would financially get any money owed, insurances. I'd make sure everything. So I would never go and say, right, I'm going to be careful and be 5 seconds off the pace.
Yeah.
I went to give absolutely 100%, but I didn't like it. Not at all.
I know you're good friends with Dario and Marino, and you must have had the conversation with him about Indy, because it's a difficult one, because if you're driving for someone like a Chip Ganassi, you're getting paid really well, you're fighting for a championship, and of course Indy's part of the championship. You've got to be thinking, well, I'm not sure about this one, but you've kind of got to do it because it's part of
he told me that he'd off certain races, he'd get into the car acknowledging that he might not come back.
Yeah.
He'd give it that 100%, and you have to respect that.
Yeah.
And that's the mindset that I think is the Dario's mindset of winning. And I'm sure that's, I look at Scott, I don't know Scott Dixon, I know Dario well, but I don't know. And I'm thinking, you see them all before the race with their wife and their little kids. And I have a problem with that. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing it, but have they really all taken on board the worst scenario that could happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've had teammates, JJ, never happened to me. That was his whole thought process. You know, if it was a hot day, he'd never put any underwear, you know, fireproof, because too hot won't happen to me.
Yeah.
And I'm the reverse.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking, what can go wrong?
It's really quite eye-opening. I know you guys race cars for a living, but that's quite eye-opening to hear that so stark and so honest. So thank you for that, because there'll be people sat listening to this who will actually have their jaw on the desk like I have, listening to how honest you were with that.
Yeah.
Well, I think, as I said at the beginning, I'm a coward. You know, and I have hurt myself. You know, I've had, you know, surgery on my neck. I've got 2 torn tendons in both shoulders at the moment because of an historic race. I've cracked ribs. I've cracked knees. That I can deal with all of that, but what I can't deal with is something that's out of my control. That the car, you know, becomes airborne at 220 mile an hour, or, you know, and the same with Indy. Could I do it? And I know that Chip and Penske are the 2 top teams, but you know, it's, you know, and seeing sort of, you know, another good mate of mine is Gilles de Ferran, and he was told, right, that's it. You've hit the wall. Your brain has been bruised 3 times within a year. It's over. Stop racing.
Yeah.
And that's a different part of, you know, I often look at motor racing and think, you know, maybe I would have been better in the 60s, you know, the 50s and 60s. But then it's the same as me. I came to a crossroads in 1979, and I could turn left and go single seater, but I had to find some money. And it was a Ford 2000 team, but a good team. Or I could turn right and it wouldn't cost me anything. And with a bit of luck, I'd make money. And back in 78, if I was dreaming of F1, well, you know, every year we were losing 3 or 4 drivers. Yeah. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that. I want to drive an F1 car, you know, the money, the adrenaline, but don't want to hurt myself or get killed or get crippled. And motorsport's gone on an awful long way, and Formula One is a lot safer today. However, I'm not so sure Indy is. No. It's got better and better, but for me, it's still one of the top health hazards.
That speed, if you hit the wall, it's never going to be.
No. So, yeah.
What I would say is you've driven with some amazing drivers over your career in various different. For you, who's your favorite, or who do you respect the most in terms of drivers?
At sheer speed, really nice guy, sheer speed, and I've driven with, you know, in different cars and teammates with Boots and Nannini, and not a couple of times in the same team as Martin Brundle, and you know, all sort of lots of Formula One drivers. But the guy that stands out above all was JJ. And when we teamed up at BMW with the McLaren to do the FIA World GT Championship, the deal was that I said, look, can we have an agreement that, you know, you qualify the first race, I qualify the second race. You start the first race, I start the second race, blah, 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 blah. And after 2 races, I came to him and said, right, you qualify it. I just could not get near his lap time. On a single lap, he was unbelievable. And in the wet, I mean, if you saw the telemetry at Spa up the straight in the wet from this McLaren, the steering angles, his foot was buried to the floor. And the steering angles, the amount of lock he had going up the straight, and he did it lap after lap after lap, not once.
Tom told me the same thing, Christensen, to be honest. The way he spoke of JJ when obviously you know, at the BMW and stuff, he just said, yeah, I mean, you could tell he had a real respect for him.
Yeah.
For anyone listening at home, by the way, JJ, we've referred to him quite a few times during this, is JJ Leto, isn't it?
Yes.
For anyone listening at home,
he's a Finnish guy. He was in Formula One in the Benetton team with Schumacher, and he had a huge accident, a testing accident, and broke his neck. And that basically put him out for 18 months. Then he came back. His first race, I think, back was Imola, the race that he and another person calls the safety car lap before they let Senna and Schumacher go. So it was his start accident that caused the safety car with all the, spurious whispers, were the tyre pressures too low and all of this. And so, coming back then after all of that, losing his F1 drive, he was obviously hungry, but he was totally relaxed. And he would spend so much time with me. He'd say, look, you're doing that corner all wrong. You're driving it like a touring car. If the car's got down, ground effect, it's got downforce, do keep off the throttle, don't hit the curb, just coast and free will into the corner and just carry 20. It will go. Just, grab yourself. It will turn in 20 mile an hour faster than you're turning in. Yeah. And if someone tells you that and he can show you on the data, then you can build yourself up to doing it. So in the end, I could get there to do his same sort of speed. And in the race, we were very similar. And I think I did a good job because at the time he gave me the car, it had no tyres and no brakes. But, I didn't let the side down. But in a qualifying lap or in the wet, he was just unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah. Good.
We've not touched on it in any great detail, and I have been saving this, and there was a question.
I keep distracting you. That's why I've been very cleverly distracting you before you get to it.
There's quite a few questions about this, so we have to pick on it. But rather than just ask you to tell us a story, I'm going to go with an angle that somebody gave us, which was of all of the on-track, off-track rivalries that we heard, the Cleland one, the big one, the Tim Harvey winning the championship, you taking Cleland out supposedly. He wanted to know, not did you, and not was your throttle stuck open when you hit the side of Clem, but was it all part of the show, and were you all friends afterwards?
No, it wasn't deliberate. It wasn't part of the show, and certainly we weren't very friendly afterwards, and we probably weren't friends for a year or so. It took a long time to become good buddies again, which we are now and have been for the last 10 years. Yeah. But my job was to win the championship for BMW, to help Tim win the championship. That's why I was there, because I was only doing 6 races that year.
This was the Listerine cars, just to paint the picture for anyone. These are the Listerine BMW E30. Beautiful, iconic kind of super touring time with the Cavaliers of kind of splitting you, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the car was a good car. It needed a lot of development, but once we got it running right come May, June, then the car was, potentially a race winner. And Tim started winning a lot of races. I was, as I said, my priority was DTM, so I'd come over and try and help when I could. So we get to Silverstone, the penultimate race, wasn't it? It was the last but one. And in testing, I was quickest and Tim was second quickest. We should have been on the front row. And then it rained for qualifying and then it dried out. And basically, we didn't start the race where we should have done. And John's the championship contender, Will Hoy's another one, and Tim Harvey's the other one. So on the first lap, off we go. And I have not been told by BMW, we have to win at all costs. It's just, we would like to win. If you can help Tim, we can do it. And a lot of that used to go on in DTM, but it was never deliberate fails to win a race or win a championship. And if there were in DTM, I wasn't involved in them. So the race starts and I pick up a couple of places and then I make a move still on the first lap on David Leslie down at, I think it's Club, the Mickey Mouse Club now, as I call it. And David, and I was a bit hard on David. I went up the inside and then I leant on him. I didn't push him off, but I leant on him. I was sort of trying to prove a point. And up until then, I'd proved a point. I could intimidate people. So the car, I could get by a lot of people just by intimidating. Anyway, David was having none of that. David, is a very capable driver then, and he wasn't having any of that. So as we left the corner, with me still trying to lean on him, he leant back and basically he spun me out. It's fine. However, he is in a Vauxhall, and it's a Ray Mallock, supposedly not a factory, but I'm already thinking, well, I'm here to help Tim, and he's obviously here to help John. So whilst he spun me out, then Rob Gravitt comes along and drives into the back of it and self-destructs the rear of the BMW. So off I go. I'm stone cold last, and I went from the back to catch John, which I think John was in 6th or 7th place. And in those next 10, 12 laps, I never hit one car. I never touched one car. There was no paint exchange between after the first lap with Leslie until I caught John. And there was John, Tim, and then myself. So I actually had to reverse that situation, not for myself, but for Tim. Will had already been given the go home signal by Tim. I think Tim had been a bit horrible to Will, and Will was out of the contention. So I did one of my best moves ever on John, and I passed him and then boxed him in so badly that Tim managed to pass both of us. So now Tim's in a championship position, John's second, and I'm third. No, Tim's in a championship position. I'm behind Tim and John's behind me. And the very next corner, John leans on me, and he leans on me badly, quite hard. And I'm thinking, that's, come on. Now, if you stop there, if I'd wanted to eliminate John, I could have just tapped him in the rear. I could have still finished probably on the podium, and I could have spun John off, not to hit anything. He just would have fallen down to 10th or 15th place or got stuck in the gravel or whatever. But I wasn't programmed to do that, and I wasn't programmed. But after John leant on me, he then lost his right mirror, door mirror gone. So if you look at all the
This is when he's gone on 2 wheels, isn't it? He's gone right up.
Yeah.
His roof.
And his mirror's gone, and he believes he's eliminated me because he leant on me hard. Now I'm still there. Now the next corner's coming, and I'm thinking, does he know I'm there? If he knows I'm there, he's going to give me 3 or 4 feet. And if he doesn't know I'm there, well, tough shit. But I still didn't think, I thought he might come off worst, but I wouldn't come off worst. But as it was, he turned into the next corner with total no compromise to the apex that he was going for. And unfortunately, I was there. And I was all at the wrong angle. If he'd given me 3 foot, I'm sure we would have touched, but we both would have made the corner. So, all these years later, I'm probably at the last corner where we touched and we both went off. I'm probably more at fault than John. But there's a lot of evidence and mitigating circumstances before that, if that makes sense. And it certainly was not a deliberate fail. If it was a deliberate fail, I would have eliminated him and carried on and tried to finish on the podium. So it was one of those circumstances. Are you still there? Let me get a battery. Let me get a battery from my phone.
See the old Fina BMW motorsport race suits in the background there.
Exactly.
That's fine thing.
before the battery goes. It's just giving me a warning. Right. Hopefully
That's great.
that'll do it. Yeah. So that was the John bit. It was unfortunate. I did feel, but I mean, the story goes on, because I don't know if you know, we then went to a tribunal, and they basically were after me, and I was told that if they find you guilty, they're going to try and take your license. And then that opened a can of worms, because under EC law, if you're earning your living as a sportsman, they can't take your livelihood away. It was a grey area. So if they tried to do that, that was going to end up with another court case. And 6-9 months later, the night before the tribunal at the RAC, my phone rings, and it's John. And after him calling me a couple of names, I thought, well, why is he ringing at the night before the tribunal? And he said, listen, he said, I've heard they're going to make an example out of someone. And he said, it should be you, but he says, I can't be sure it is you. He says, and I don't want to leave the example being me. So he said, I think we should go in and basically say it's a racing accident and go in as mates. And he said, if you don't blame me and I don't blame you, they can't do anything. And I said, well, providing you say it first, I'm not going to say it, and then you forget what our meeting was about. So I said, providing you say it first, yeah, fine. And that's exactly what we did. And they were so upset. The table of stewards, and it was Les Needham and Alan Gow, and all these people, and John had a lawyer and I had a lawyer. We'd spent thousands of pounds up to then getting witnesses. I had all the video from, I think it was HP, the TV company that used to do all the filming. I had all on Monday morning. It was a mate of mine, and I went straight down and I got all the in-car footage from David Leslie, John Clennon's, all the audio, because John was effing and blinding at me when I got past him. He was effing and this, and the old Murray walked a finger up and all of this business.
He's going for first place, Steve.
Yeah, that's it. So I had all of that. And then suddenly, before the tribunal came, all video evidence is not allowed. Funny that, isn't it? So, I thought they're not playing fair here. And anyway, we went in and no one got blamed, and we both walked out, and he's become a friend. Not on that day he wasn't a mate, but he certainly he still is. And
what a great era, great racing. I mean, when I was coming through and watching the touring car racing, what a fantastic, yourself, Cleland, Tim Harvey. I mean, just fantastic racing. Just brilliant racing.
The whole era was just to have been a part of that, and a big part of that story is a legacy I'd be proud of.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, John says, I'm not so sure. I don't know if I agree with him or not, but John says our accident, that bit of footage, put touring cars on the map, and I think possibly it did, because that race there was no other main events that weekend. There was no Formula One. There was no World Rally or anything. And the only race that was going on, big race, was BTC at Silverstone. And it was front page of all the motor magazines, all the sport, it was front page, Motoring News, it was front page. And I do, as controversial as it was and turned out to be, and I'm the guy with the black hat. I turned out to be the bad guy. Every time I do a chat at a car club, I get all the, I'm a mate of John Clennon's, what you got to say about that?
Huh? Man's an animal.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I do some sim racing, and Dario called me that the other night on the radio. We were doing some review. He said, "You're a bloody animal. The man's an animal."
Go back. Germany loves him. You can go back there.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. I think it probably did help, but there were some great. There were, as years went on from there, it became bigger and bigger. But in the end, it got daft. You know, Super Touring, they were spending, you know, between £5 and £8 million to win a championship, and it couldn't continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm pleased. It's one of the most told stories in British motorsport. I've heard you tell it on various interviews. But I could not have interviewed Steve Soper without asking that. Mates would have
That one.
phoned me. So I'm pleased that we heard it firsthand. And I think a few bits in there that I'd not heard before. So thank you for that.
Brilliant.
That's good. That's fine.
5 questions, Paul?
I think some quick fire questions. Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Awesome.
How long we
Nothing frightening in here.
Sorry?
Nothing frightening in here. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
Right. Okay. So, Steve, just the first thing that comes into your mind on this one. So, Top Gear or Grand Tour?
Probably Top Gear.
Spa 24 hours or Nürburgring 24 hours? Because you won them
In
both.
what way?
Well, you've won them both. Which would be
In a childbirth kind of a way, Steve.
Sorry?
In a childbirth kind of a way.
Well, in that way, yes. I mean, Spa I've won twice. Nürburgring, funny races. Nürburgring, the first time I ever did the race was with a Ford Sierra Cosworth, was with Klaus Nieswitz and Klaus Ludwig. First race ever we did, we won 24 hours. First time I'd ever done that race, we won it. So dead easy. I did Spa 9 times before I won it. Right. And on the 9th time, my wife was in the UK about to give birth, and I'd flown home, and after we qualified, I flew home from Belgium to London, was there at the birth of my daughter Cassia, and then I flew back to start the race the next day. And after 23 hours, we were second. We'd been second for 23 hours. Yeah. Snitzer were in the lead with Van der Poel and I forget who else was in the car, Hager and Winklock, I think. And I was driving with Christian Danner and Michel Martin. So with an hour, just over an hour left, I did my stint, got all changed, dressed, showered, washed my hair, dumped all my horrible, sweaty, soaking wet overalls in a bag, and told the team boss, Gabriele Raffinelli, Tim Bugatti at the time, right, I'm off. You're not going anywhere. We can win. And, you know, he's Italian. And the amount of times I'd heard we can win, you know, he was still saying we could win with a conrod through the side of the engine, you know, sometimes in the pits. So we had a heated discussion, and he won and I lost. So I had to get all my horrible, sweaty overalls back on and get back in the car. It wasn't my turn. It was Christian Danner's turn to drive the car. And he said, well, he's not going to win. If anyone can win, it's you. You're going in. He's not. So I got in the car, and now I was not happy. You know, I thought I'd be on a plane by now, going back to England to look at my new baby daughter. And as it turned out, I was back in this bloody car. And I've never been a fan of 24-hour races, even Spa. They're too hard. They take too much out of you. These mates of mine that say they're great, I mean, after 3 or 4 hours, I've had it. You know, and I've never been that fit. So I've got great stamina. So I just dig deep. But I suffer on the Monday, Tuesday afterwards. I'm absolutely exhausted. Anyway, so I'm in the car and I'm now mad and angry. And he's saying that they're short on fuel, and I'm driving this thing flat, absolutely flat. And all of a sudden, they're telling me that by pit signals that they're slowing him down because he's got to make another splash and dash. And if he does a splash and dash, you know, quick pit stop for fuel, they're never going to win. So what they try and do, and he's about 3/4 of a lap in front. He's a long way. He's not inside. But Eric van der Poel's in the car, and they start slowing him down. Putting signals out saying, you know, drop the revs, low fuel, save fuel, drop the revs. And he'd been in the car, he double or triple stinted it. And as soon as they tried to get him to slow down, he lost his rhythm. He was totally knackered. Suddenly I was taking, you know, 5-10 seconds a lap off of him. And then suddenly I could see him in the distance at the end of the straight. And I caught him on the penultimate lap. And he woke up a bit once he saw me right behind him, and through the bus stop I had to sort of muscle my way by. So it certainly wasn't a nice clean move, but he wasn't pushed off or pushed wide. I just had to muscle my way by, and basically that was it. We then won, and after 9 attempts, I was happy with that one, yeah. But again, it was, yeah, thank God, and it was funny because BMW were getting involved. Charlie Lamb from Schnitzer was getting sort of telling BMW it's going to end in tears, and they led for 22.5 hours. Just call it 1-2. And Paul Rocher didn't often go to many races. He was there at the time, and he just said, "It's motor racing. Let them race." He said, "If it ends up in tears, it ends up in tears. It's motor racing," and that was great. So we were allowed to race, and I'm still friends with Eric. He wasn't very pleased with me afterwards, and nor was Schnitzer. But Bagazzi thought it was brilliant. Again, I got changed, showered, washed my hair, got rid of everything, and then these flipping Italian team was still. By the time I got back to the pits again to say goodbye after the race, another hour and a half had gone by. They then grabbed hold of me. It used to be this muddy pond in the middle of Spa in the paddock. And they threw me in this muddy pond. So I then had to have a third shower and change of clothing. So they were ecstatic. They thought it was great. Brilliant. So on that back, yes, the most difficult race was Spa. I won it 2 years later, which seemed very easy after 92, and also my first daughter was born, so it was a nice. She nearly got named Spa, but we decided against that.
Guy, I know that wasn't really a quick fire, but that was one that I did mean to ask Steve.
It was a great one. It was a good answer. So beach holiday or adventure holiday?
Oh, adventure.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
There we go.
Oversteer or understeer?
Neither. Neutral. But yeah, car has to point. If it doesn't point, it's no good. It has to turn in and point. So I'll tell you, if there's time, I'll tell you a good story about understeer or oversteer.
Go for it.
Okay, quick. So 97 FAI GT World Championship, we're running a McLaren. We were the only McLaren that was competitive. There were 5 other McLarens. We were the 6th. And our car, JJ used to qualify, but he technically wasn't brilliant. So he used to let me do all the setup. Everything, all the aero, every bit of thing we could put on the front was on the front of that car. We were running the smallest rear wing, no side plates, no good, nothing. Everything was on the front to make it, brake late and point and get into the apex. And all the other cars, I think the only other McLaren that won was our teammate, and they won at Silverstone, and it was red flagged. They wouldn't have won if the race hadn't been stopped early because of a downpour. So we were the only competitive car. Not one of the other cars copied our aero. They all had great big rear wings, big down plates, gurneys. Now, if I had been in one of those cars, I would have tried our set. It was so visual. Yeah. You didn't, they were just convinced it was a red herring, that we'd done something else. So they all ran loads of aero at the rear. The car must have understeered like a pig, and all they're potentially doing is braking really early, and then turning in. And where we could brake as the car was designed with carbon brakes and aero, and still make it turn in. We ran it like that all year. I mean, we run little tiny bits on the wheel arches. We ran vents in the bloody, over the wheels. There was gurney flaps, there was splitters. We lengthened the splitters. We took the droop out of the suspension. The suspension was wired up, so we even tried to use the wheel weights to hold the front down. Everything was on the front. whole year they never copied, and they never won another. No one ever won a race.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
Strange, isn't it? So yeah,
Well,
I don't like oversteer. I don't like understeer. But it needs to turn in.
Fair enough. Good question. Good answer. So Ford Sierra Cosworth or BMW 318i, and it could be any BMW. Say the 318.
Yeah, probably the Cosworth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. V6 or V8?
V8.
Yep. Okay. So pass along question from Oliver Gavin, who was our last guest. He said, "What was the worst prank a teammate has ever pulled on you?"
Worst prank.
I think being chucked in the pond at Spa.
Well, we were at a BMW do in Austria, and I can't remember what do it was, but all the drivers were there, and there was this rough-looking girl there, woman, you know, not an attractive girl, and there was like a takeaway, sort of queuing up takeaway buffet type meal, and she was stood in front of me, or I thought it was a she at the time, and she was stood in front of me, and she put my hand where I didn't need to put my hand, and it had a willy, yeah, and I'm sort of slightly old school about that. I did not appreciate that. Anyway, the woman in drag turned out to be Dieter Quester.
Oh.
And he'd spent 3 hours being made up by other women in this organization to pull certain pranks all night on us drivers. I could not tell it was Dieter. I just thought it was not a particularly attractive woman.
Brilliant.
So that was the worst thing.
I once went to prize giving with Tom Coronel. Tom Coronel turned up in his black tie with this girl, and attractive girl and everything else. And they were all like, like kissing and cuddling. And they went off and disappeared. And about an hour later, they came back. He had her dress on, and she had his black tie on. They did a complete outfit swap, and they just walked back in the room. It was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, I love it. Well, at least you didn't. Your hand wasn't forced somewhere.
No, that's true. That is true. So, Steve, do you have a pass along question for our next guest? We're not quite sure who it's going to be yet.
But only guy could move on so swiftly from that.
I know.
Go on.
Do you have a pass along question, Steve, for our next guest? It can be anything, literally as random as you like.
I'm always was interested what your teammates, mine, yours, your next guest, think about you as a driver, as a teammate.
Yeah, great question.
That's an interesting one. I mean, I was give you an example. I've known Emanuele Pirro since the 80s, since 82, 83, and we were good, very, very good friends. And he went to Formula One, and then when that died a death, he came to BMW, and he ended up my teammate in 91 or 92 at DTM. And a few years later, he said to me very seriously, I mean, he stayed at my house, I'd stayed at his place in Rome, I'd lent him my car. We were good mates. And he said, you were the worst teammate I've ever been with in all of my career. And I really did not know why I was a bad teammate.
Did you ask him? Did you ask him why? Did you ask him?
Yeah, he wouldn't tell me. And I mean, that year didn't go. I was driving for an Italian team, Bugatti, full-blown factory BMW team, but they were Italian. They were desperate for an Italian in that team. I'd been there 3 or 4 years. And I do think that after F1, he came thinking he was going to, blow everyone off.
Yeah.
And of course, after a few races, I had more points than him. And in DTM, the person who's got the most points, then everyone gathers round to support them.
Yeah.
But I didn't think I'd done anything wrong. But, you know, having said that, if there was one engine, if there was one new development engine, then I'd fight like crazy to make sure I had it. I'm not going to stand back and say, but that's always been, I've always been like that, but I would never fail anyone or be, you know, we spoke at the first test, and after the first race, we didn't speak then for another 2-3 years.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing.
So, you know, people say I'm very selfish, but I don't think, you know, I'm not if I'm sharing a car with you, Guy, I'm not selfish. But if I've got a teammate on my left, well, he's there to beat, isn't he?
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's the nature of your teammate. I think if you are in your own car in a two-car team, you know, it's a bit like Formula One. You've got to beat the guy next door because, as you said before, it's, you know, you want to beat them for yourself because for your own career, but also for if you want a long career, you've got to be able to beat your teammate.
Yeah.
I think in sports car racing, it's slightly different because it's about you know, you're only as good as your teammates, so you've got to work collectively to get the best out of each other. So that is more of a kind of camaraderie, kind of working together.
Yeah, you definitely, and you're, as you just said, you're in the same car, so you've got to work together. But everything's a compromise.
But quite often you are thrown together, so you know, it's throwing people together, and you've kind of got to make it work. And naturally, sometimes you gel, and sometimes you don't. So it's a great question, though. But I'll definitely put it on its desk. Yeah, it's a really
and I think most people who have, you know, been motor racing semi-professional or professional, we all have a different opinion of how we are perceived by their teammates. You know, I certainly, I mean, he shocked me. I was really, oh shit. Yeah. And slightly upset by it. Yeah. And at first I thought he was winding me up, and I've mentioned it since, and he just poo-hoos it. He pretends it was a joke, and I know at the time it wasn't.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you probably were a pain in his ass, because if you're quick and you're tough, then
and I knew the team. I didn't speak Italian, but I knew the team like the back of my hand.
Yeah.
You know, it was one of those situations.
Brilliant.
But can't think.
Well, I think that's what I knew I was going to enjoy this one, but I think that's been one of the most honest and human podcasts that we've done, Guy, with the stories we've had and the way they've been told. So thank you very much for that, Steve. I think
you know why? Because I'm not employed anymore.
So that's been great. As I said, you know, absolute legend, Steve, and you know, I think Paul and I really, you know, wanted to make this podcast happen. And you know, I don't really know you very well, but obviously, you know, I had a chance to sort of get to know you a little bit through the podcast and the conversations that we've had. And I'm sure, you know, through your historic racing, because obviously I do a little bit as well. So in Goodwood and things, we'll catch up and
yeah, that would be good. I mean, hopefully there's going to be some this year, but I hope so.
I think we all need that, don't we? If you're watching this, by the way, on YouTube, don't forget you can tune into any of our podcasts on iTunes or wherever you download the podcast. If you're listening to this, I do recommend that you watch it, because some of our expressions, especially in that last bit after Oliver Gavin's question there, the expressions are probably well worth a watch back. So we appreciate the questions, because they do help us come at things from a slightly different angle sometimes. And tonight the questions were particularly good.
Yeah, that's great.
Thanks. I will do.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope whoever's going to watch it, they don't think I'm the person, and obviously Emanuele thought I was at that time. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah, just the person thought you were.
25 years or so. The interesting thing is, sitting here now being a senior, nearly 70, when you're talking about that career, you know, 80s, 90s, end of 90s, early 2000s, doesn't seem that long ago. You know, 2000 doesn't seem 21 years ago. Crazy, isn't it?
It flies by. I mean, I always think about everything in seasons, as you know, from racing.
Yeah.
Season. And I look back and it's like, God, that was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And
how old are you now, Guy?
40.
Shit, no way.
46.
Bloody hell.
So me and Dario started race. Dario was like a year older than me. So like there was kind of Coulthard, McNish, And then there was Dario, like Oliver, Gavin, myself, all kind of a similar time growing up. So yeah, so I'm getting an old man now. So
Yeah.
I'm just doing it racing now for fun, to be fair, and looking after some drivers and stuff. But yeah, it's great. It's just great. That's why I like the podcast. Is it's good to have these stories.
Yeah.
People, and everybody's got such great stories to tell. It's good that they're out there, really. So but yeah, thanks very much, Steve, and then
No, thank you.